Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar on migrating your data center to Azure. Wade Walker here from Big Green IT. We also have Lindsay Cowan and Austin Kelly joining us. You'll be hearing from all three of us today, and maybe even Chuck, who sent out all the emails and invited everybody here. So we're going to kick this off now. And if you've been to our webinars in the past, you know we like things being a little interactive. So there are areas where you can, the GoToWebinar app, where you can submit questions. Feel free to submit questions along the way. Lindsay will be monitoring those questions and interrupting Austin or myself while we're talking to answer your questions. So please don't be shy. Please ask a question. If you have that question, I bet you other people have the same question, especially as companies are on their cloud journey towards things like Microsoft 365 and Azure. Some haven't started, some are in the middle of it, some are a little farther along. Our client base fits into that kind of matrix of people migrating to Azure. So again, don't be shy, please ask your questions. Also, we're going to record this webinar. We'll put it up on our website after it's done. And then Chuck will be following up with everybody with the PDF version of these slides. So you don't need to feverishly write things down, or if you see a link, you go, I want to capture that link, don't worry about it. It'll be in a PDF. And in the very second to last slide or third to last slide, we put in all the links on one slide to make it easy for you to capture all the links in one location. So that's kind of the administrative trivia stuff like to start with. So we'll put this webinar on our website recording. We'll send you the PDF version of it and ask questions along the way. I'm going to share my webcam real quick here. See what comes up. There it is, the other screen. So this is me, Wade Walker, saying hi to you from Carlsbad, California. I'm going to turn the camera off now just to make sure it doesn't slow down my computer from a presentation standpoint. But I did want to say hi and thank everybody for joining us. I know you're super busy today and darn near every day running IT departments and doing projects like this. So appreciate you taking time out of your day and joining us for this webinar. Next slide is today's agenda. No surprise, we're talking about Azure migrations. I'll give you an overview of it. For some of you, that might be a review because you've already started this process. For others, you might haven't yet started the process, so it's good to level set everything for everybody from an overview standpoint. Talk about migration journeys. We call these journeys because every company's journey is different. We have some clients that are moving rapidly to move everything to the cloud. We have others that are just tipping their toes in it and moving one workload at a time. Email, maybe one virtual machine, maybe Azure Backup, just to back up data. So we'll help you with that migration journey. We're going to also cover licensing, cost management, and optimization. Those are big pieces to the puzzle too, is, hey, how much is this going to cost on a monthly basis? And then how do I manage that cost, and then how do I optimize my environment once it's been moved over to Azure? And then we'll follow up with the next steps, question and answer, wrap up. And again, ask questions along the way. And any questions that we're going to put to the end, we'll discuss at the end, especially if they're a longer topic that we want to answer at the end because we want to get the slides done in the allotted time that we've got for today's webinar. A little bit about us to help you. We're focused on getting businesses to help move their environment into the Microsoft cloud. And again, move at your pace. No surprise, the pandemic has really sped up moving to the cloud. We've had so many people move their phone system into Teams, move Microsoft 365 services, a lot of Azure Virtual Desktop, Windows 365 for virtual desktops in Azure. Hybrid environment, we still sell a lot of servers, a lot of storage to our clients that are still in that hybrid environment. Some will be forever because of regulations or country requirements or whatever it is. So we really help you on that journey. We really focus our business on the Microsoft Cloud Platform, from this team here to our engineering team and our support team, all of whom are certified on Microsoft Cloud services. And we really help you develop this modern infrastructure for running your company as efficiently as possible, security is a big part of the equation, so we look at every single project with security. We do have a support team, as I mentioned, to provide support for this. And then cloud allows you to really kind of grow and pivot as your business needs change. We'll bring up a couple examples in here along the way. And I'm sure you've had to deal with that, some pivots yourself in the past couple of years here. We're dealing with the work from home environment, and everybody's coming back into the office. No, wait, they're not, because there's another strain out there, and now people are staying home. So we manage over almost 100,000 licenses of Microsoft 365 for our clients from a Microsoft 365 standpoint. For Azure, we've got oodles and oodles of Azure clients in a wide range of industries. And like I mentioned, some are just doing a little bit of business in there. Some are over 6 figures a month in Azure because they literally run their business in Azure and their websites and their applications that get you access on the web or download to your iPhone or Android. So we have a wide range of customers here in the Microsoft Cloud ecosystem. Now we're going to pivot to Austin Kelly. He's going to talk about an overview of the Azure migration world. So Austin can say hi. Let's make sure we can hear you.
Can you hear me and can you see me? Awesome. Thank you, Wade. Perfect. Yeah, we'll just be doing a little bit of an Azure migration overview, talk about some of the core benefits of migrating, some events that may trigger your decision to migrate, projects and use cases that we've seen and that a lot of you are probably familiar with. And then we'll talk about security and compliance too. So thank you for that. I'll go ahead and turn my camera off so I don't lose any bandwidth here. Perfect. So kicking things off, I want to review some of the core benefits of cloud migration. And moving to the cloud simplifies the deployment and management of infrastructure and allows your business to quickly scale on demand. So when we think about benefits, there's really 2 large categories that we can really take into consideration. One is the technical benefits, and separate from that are the financial benefits. So starting with the technical benefits, when you start looking at deploying workloads to the cloud, there's aspects or abilities that come into play that are more limiting on-prem, but more accessible in the cloud. And one of those is scalability. So the ability to scale out your resources depending on usage, utilization, and the demand of your business needs. Second to that is, second to availability, on-premise is more costly to build highly available infrastructure versus, building out infrastructure in the cloud. Third would be security and compliance. So within the cloud, Microsoft is always adding to its security infrastructure and tool sets to keep you on par with what's transpiring with respect to security threats on the global networks. Fourth, capacity optimization, meaning that you are only paying for the resources that you actually use. So your capacity and consumption can fluctuate depending on your business's demands. On the financial side, certainly, you can start transforming your overall budget from what was historically a capital expenditure investment to a more operational expenditure type pricing model that can be fluctuated, like I said, based on what you're consuming on a monthly basis. You can also benefit from the overall reduced data center footprint, which in Azure is no longer required. You can also benefit from overall staffing productivity. So these dev operations or DevOps, quote unquote, type of concept where your operations folks are more focused on automation and automating, deploying and deprovisioning workloads are more dynamic than racking and stacking servers and dealing with heating or cooling type of issues. And you almost always immediately benefit from a sustainability and flexibility perspective as well.
Perfect. Thank you for that, Austin. And for the audience here, we have a few poll questions. We want to get a feeling from this audience of your environments and things like that. And that way we can tailor some of our discussions and commentary. So the first poll question I'm going to launch here, let's make sure everybody can see this. All right, so I'm just opening the poll. Chuck and everybody, do you guys see the poll question? Oh, good, we already have votes coming in. So basically, how many VMs do you have on premise? Curious, or other cloud providers, or just a curiosity for us, what are we looking at from potentially moving into Azure? If it's just a handful, we can tailor some of this discussion towards smaller environments. If you're looking to move tens to dozens of servers, then we can talk about some of the higher benefits. So looks like it's right now 1 to 10 is winning at 60%. The other two combined are about 40%. So give about 10 more seconds here. Give this poll about a minute to complete. And all right, I'm going to close the poll. Thank you, everybody, for your input. So yeah, close the poll. We've got about 60% are just looking to move a handful of VMs, 1 to 10, and then 40% is looking to do 11 to 20 or 21 or more. That's what we do see in our client base, is starting with a few, and then maybe staying with that, or over time moving other workloads and services into the Azure. So perfect. Thank you for that, Allison. I'll now let you head on to your next slide.
Perfect. Thank you, Wade. All right, so when is it time to migrate? Well, there's a lot of trigger events that can cause you to consider moving your environment to the cloud. A lot of these probably what you're going through today. So data center contracts expiring. So for example, SQL Server 2008 is going end of life. You wanted to, or you needed to upgrade, or maybe it's your Windows Server that's going end of life and you want to upgrade. If you move to Azure, you're always on the latest and greatest version of SQL Server if you choose, as well as Windows Server, so you won't have to worry about that. Quickly integrating acquisitions. So whether that's streamlining and creating workflows and business processes, maybe connecting to on-prem applications with cloud-based applications, or possibly connecting to third-party services, all that can be done within Azure. You have urgent capacity needs. So you've maxed out your on-prem database and need to offload some or all of that data. You can easily spin up a virtual machine or storage account and migrate the data to make room and expand as needed.
We saw this a lot. If I can jump in here real quick. So we saw this a lot during the pandemic, no surprise. Capacity needs, people needed to grow their capacity. And also, as another one come up here, hybrid work from home, where either capacity because of what was going on, or work from home, and we were able to quickly add like virtual desktop environments with Azure Virtual Desktop, or servers or storage in other environments, especially as companies dealt with a very changing dynamic in the past couple of years. So this one really was a big driver the past couple of years, is these urgent needs built on factors that were out of our control. So here you go, next, Austin.
Yeah, software and hardware refresh. So as you see that your equipment is aging, it reaches its end of useful life, becomes less reliable with frequent failures that can ultimately affect your environment. So while replacing your on-prem equipment is not only a significant, like I said, capital expenditure, but doing so in a non-disruptive way is greater than if you were just to migrate your workloads to Azure. And then we have cybersecurity and compliance. So maybe you have specific needs around security and compliance. Many public clouds like Azure have built-in security features and specialized cloud security tools that can help ensure that your organization's resources are protected. And then there are additional security features and solutions that can be implemented as well. And then, like Wade said, hybrid work from home. I think we all experienced this in 2020. A pandemic hit and we were forced to pivot and adjust the way we work. So Azure can really allow you to move your applications and resources, or like Wade said, spin up a virtual desktop environment so that your employees can connect to resources from really anywhere on any device. And then application innovation, delivering apps faster. So building on the hybrid work from home trigger, Azure allows you to bring the way you develop, deliver, and scale apps more efficiently and quickly, whether that's through Azure App Services, Azure DevOps, Azure Kubernetes Services. So these and many other solutions allow you to deploy apps faster and make them more accessible to your employees and your customers. And then software, end of support, like I mentioned earlier. Maybe you have a specific application running on VMware or Windows Server, SQL Server. This may be one of the triggers that make you think of moving to the cloud.
Perfect. Let me go to the next slide.
Awesome. So in addition to the factors that trigger your move to cloud, it's good to consider the range of workloads and apps that can also be migrated. So the examples below depict sort of common workloads that customers migrate to Azure and what we've seen with our clients, making the decision to move to Azure. So Windows Server, SQL Server, even Linux and open source databases. So although Azure is a Microsoft quote unquote product, a lot of the workloads running today in Azure are Linux based. Web apps, whether you want to refactor a Windows application using app service or refactor an app using SQL or rebuild an app using app services, you can do so with Azure. SAP, specialized workloads, like I said, last slide, maybe you're using VMware or NetApp or an Oracle DB. And then lastly, virtual desktop or VDI. Azure offers Azure Virtual Desktop, which essentially is a desktop as a service, which with the pandemic especially is becoming more and more popular and something we're having discussions with our clients, seems like on a daily and weekly basis. So all of these and more are projects that may trigger you to move to the cloud, and all of which Big Green IT can help with. All righty. So moving on to what Azure is, or more so where Azure is. So this slide is a great representation of the global scale and reach that Microsoft has. So Azure resides in multiple Microsoft data centers across the globe. In fact, there are over 50 different regions in over 140 countries that Azure has a presence in. So Microsoft manages these data centers, and these data centers make up what a lot of companies that are still primarily on-prem have to manage on a daily, monthly, and weekly basis, whether that's managing your servers or storage, power, cooling, the list goes on. Microsoft is doing that all for you with Azure. Azure is the second largest network behind the internet, and unlike what many people naturally assume, like I said, Azure is not just the cloud for Microsoft things, right? It's Linux as well. And in fact, over half the VMs running in Azure are some flavor of Linux. So because Azure is not specific to just Microsoft, 98% of Fortune 500s have resources deployed in Azure today. And some of those, for example, are companies Chipotle, Coca-Cola, Xbox, the NFL, and many, many more. And obviously, as time goes on and we evolve, there will be more and more companies adopting the cloud, thus utilizing Azure. Next slide, please.
Sorry, stalled a little bit. There you go.
No, you're good. You're good. So not only is Azure, a global or a worldwide cloud solution, it's the most secure and trusted public cloud with more security and compliance certifications than both Google and or Amazon. So there's more than 90 compliance certifications, including over 50 specific to global regions and countries. So not only are these certifications on an industry level, but the regional, global, and government level as well. So whether you're a doctor's office, a health insurer, hospital, and you require HIPAA, or you're maybe handling credit card information and require PCI, or maybe you're an organization that performs services that could impact a client's financial statements and require SOC 1, 2, or 3, that's all available within Azure and Microsoft. And really, there's no other public cloud that has this many security and compliance configurations and settings than Microsoft Azure.
Perfect. Thank you for that, Austin. And many of our clients are in the healthcare space, so they have healthcare requirements, or in the finance space. We do a lot of work with Native American tribes and casinos and tribal casinos, a lot of requirements that they have as well. So security and compliance are part and parcel to almost every single conversation we have with our clients.
Absolutely.
Now, Wade Walker here, I'm going to take over and get you on just some of these Azure migration journeys. Again, each company has their own journey, and the way it sort of starts here is on the left here. We start looking at assessing what's going on in your current environment to see what's the best way to migrate it. The typical migration that we start with is what's called rehosting, aka lift and shift, where you copy your VMs from where they are today, as is, and copy them into Azure. Next is called a refactoring. The next 3 or 4 things coming up here are part of what Microsoft calls modernization. So if you see things in the Azure world, or you hear Austin and I or Lindsay talking about modernization, that's really taking your compute environment from a lift and shift scenario running in VMs and then moving it into different ways of doing it. In this case, refactor. You might have to refactor some of your code or your services to be a little more cloud friendly. We'll get into a little more depth on refactoring in these next slides as well. Re-architecting, completely redesigning something. Takes a little more time to do this. We had a client that moved some things to Azure. They were using some old encryption methodologies, and it was causing some problems on-prem. And when they went onto the cloud, they went, this is a great time to re-architect this and do things a little differently. Rebuild is really rebuilding your apps for cloud-based services such as microservices and things like Azure Logic Apps. And then lastly, I just put this one here on the side. This one's called Replace. You don't often hear Replace a lot. We'll get to this a little deeper, but it's basically, this is software as a service. Great example is Exchange Server. We don't see people moving via an Exchange VM into Azure. They go to Microsoft 365. So Replace is akin to software as a service. And then once we're in there, to the right here, we get to Optimize, which is looking at the environment. Optimize is also can be synonymous with modernization, is modernizing what you have in Azure to run in some native services for Azure. Same three pillars here of assess, migrate, and optimize. We recommend assessing your environment with a few of the migration tools I've listed here. We have a lot of other tools that we use as well, depending on the need. Perform that migration. These are three common migration steps, and then that whole optimization and modernization step afterwards. A little more details on these modes. The rehost again, lift and shift. You'll hear this as the infrastructure as a service. And as Austin mentioned, reduces your capital expenditures, moves much more to a operating expense model. Next is that refactor. Just some minimal changes. You can do some. This is where we might consider containers like Kubernetes or platform as a service, such as SQL Server running as a service. And then re-architect and rebuild. Oftentimes these are kind of combined into one, because if you desire to re-architect as is in Azure, you're likely going to rebuild and just start to do more platform as a server, serverless, microservices. But if you see any of these words or terminologies, this is really what they're being referred to in the Azure migration environment. Next, a little more details in each of these. Again, rehost, this is the lift and shift. This is where you really are moving to the cloud, not ready to modernize yet. But one of the triggers that Austin had listed up there is data center contracts expiring. We get a lot of migrations because somebody's with a data center, they've got all their VMs and storage in their data center, and they're looking to compare the cost of running it in Azure versus their existing data center. And every time the cost is much less to run it into Azure than it is in a data center. People then choose to migrate their environment, lift and shift it as is with some VMs. And there might be some VMs we upgrade, but oftentimes clients choose to just lift and shift as is and then upgrade operating systems or server software once they get there. Some of the benefits, you don't have to manage your data center anymore. It's flexible, scalable, and you're not buying hardware anymore. So you're really out of the business of, 4 figures, 5 figures, 6-figure one-time expenses, plus, typically 20% of service and maintenance for your service and storage. That just kind of goes away, and now you just pay for things on an Azure environment as you need. The refactoring. This is where we start to touch into containers, platform as a service. This gives you that agility to use some of the more modernization tools built into Azure. Doesn't require too much work. Like I said, the one client I'm referencing that had to change an older encryption model to a newer one, they were able to get that done pretty quickly. And it was also good from an audit standpoint because their auditors were asking them to use a more modern encryption environment. So being able to refactor something and leverage some other tools in Azure is your lowest cost and least effort to the step into the world of quote unquote modernization. Re-architecting, so kind of decomposing or deconstructing your environment into more serverless and microservices environments. This is where we start talking about things like web apps. That same client also had a web server. So your typical virtual machine, there in this case, they're running Linux and they're running Apache and some other related tools, and they migrated to a web service, which is just a service in Azure that just provides web services. And therefore, they didn't need to worry about running a VM anymore with Linux or running Apache on it. They just ran a web service. And then for scalability, they could add additional web services as needed for increased use. So they also opted again to consolidate or modernize their web server VM into web services. And it takes a little more work, but now you've got a web service that's just running as a web service. You don't have to apply patching to it, updates. Don't have to worry about the security of the underlying operating system. And then as also in those benefits, the performance and scalability, just a simpler way to run something when you re-architect it. Rebuilding, this takes a little bit more work. This is where you're really starting to write things for cloud native environments. So when you hear people say born in the cloud or built in the cloud, they're basically talking about this environment where you really are looking at logic apps, other web services, for databases, platform as a service, and all these microservices that are in there are in Azure. It's a paradigm shift. So when people do talk about this modernization, we do bring up that it is a big paradigm shift because now you're looking really at just running everything natively in the cloud and developing your software to leverage those tools. So it's a again a paradigm shift for a lot of older companies. For newer companies, it's like, hey, this is the way we're starting, and we've got a few companies that are doing some machine learning, artificial intelligence, and they've built out their machine learning and AI tools natively in Azure. And we're not migrating from virtual machines or anything like that. Rather, we're just doing that machine learning in here. One of them does some drug discovery. So working on some drugs, believe it or not, working on a vaccine for COVID. And they did a whole bunch of drug scenarios using machine learning and artificial intelligence, and really just in this serverless and microservices environment. From a migration standpoint, when we do have this discussion, it's usually one VM or a few VMs at a time to move into this because it is a more of a concerted effort to get into this environment. And then lastly, replace. This is the one I brought up earlier, the classic case of we've only had, I think, one customer move an Exchange server into Azure. Everybody else is just moved to Microsoft 365 and starting to use your software as a service offerings. So I bring this up, not that this is a migration project that we talked about from an Azure standpoint, but we bring it up when we're talking with companies because sometimes the best answer is not to migrate, but just to completely replace with a software as a service solution. Look at my next poll. Here, so I'm going to bring this up because this does relate a little bit to Office 365. I'm going to put a survey out here for people to see, are you actually using Office 365, which has been technically rebranded to Microsoft 365. So I'm going to start that poll now. It's a simple yes, no. So thanks for clicking on this and letting us know the answer to this question. Well, so far it's a runaway. 100% have said yes. We'll give a few more seconds here. I figured this one would be pretty Microsoft 365 heavy. All right. So nearly everyone has voted, and it's 100% Microsoft 365. So I'm going to close this poll. Thank you very much for answering that. And again, we put this in the slide here because we just want to just set that into just kind of in your thinking that sometimes migration to Azure just isn't the answer. It's really migrating to software as a service. Next, we're going to jump in here to talk about licensing. Oh, before we do that, Austin, Lindsay, are there any questions that I should be that we've got here to me to answer? I have not been looking at the questions section of the.
Nope. No questions yet. Yeah.
But I'm sure there will be some soon.
Perfect. All right. Thank you. Now talking about licensing optimization, cost management. As Lindsay and Austin know, this is usually one of the very first questions we get asked is, how do I deal with the licensing environment? Microsoft has different models for dealing with licensing. So there's 4 things I've put together here that are ways to manage licensing. Hybrid benefit is taking a product with software assurance like Windows Server and moving those licenses called license mobility into Azure. Another is reservations. We have clients that will do a 1-year or 3-year reservation of a virtual machine in Azure or multiple virtual machines in Azure to get a discount on that virtual machine. Please note it's a discount only on the virtual machine compute, so only on the CPU and RAM. It's not a discount on the storage. So if storage is the main cost driver of that virtual machine, the reservation does not touch storage. It touches the compute, the CPU and RAM. Microsoft does have a dev test subscription. So basically it's like your production environment without the cost of software. So there's no Windows Server fees and things like that. And then there are spot virtual machines, which allows you to run at highly discounted prices. They also run in a different tier of Azure. So when people are interested in that, we do bring up the fact that it runs on a lower tier and has different service level agreements from Microsoft. So it's not for everybody, but it's a good way to do some testing on something at a much more affordable rate. And then I bring up in here Azure Calculator. I think Austin, you probably use this every second, every minute, every hour?
Multiple times a day. It feels like I'm in there just as much as I am my email, for sure.
I have a joke saying friends don't let friends use the Azure Calculator. Not that it's broken or anything, it's just really hard. I'm not saying don't check it out. It's publicly available. Just search online Azure Calculator. Then you can start seeing prices of VMs and storage and containers and Azure Site Recovery, so on and so forth. There's a lot of caveats to using the Azure Calculator, so I bring it in here with a question mark saying, yes, use it. This is a great way to get pricing, and all of these things on top here are in the Azure Calculator, so you can actually get pricing for them. But there are just a lot of little gotchas on it. So if you are using it, please do not hesitate to contact us. We'll help go through it. There are some settings that don't quite make some sense, and Microsoft literally has webinars on how to use the Azure Calculator because it's a very complex tool, which is wonderful. It's just, like I said, friends don't let friends use it. So just contact us and we'll help you on costing out your environment and using the Azure Calculator for that. In addition, the migration tools we use that we hit on earlier, the migration tools, most of them also have some calculator components. And then we're a member of Microsoft's Datacenter optimization team, which is a 3-letter acronym for Azure. And as being a member of that DCO team, the Datacenter optimization team, we have some proprietary pricing tools from Microsoft. So for larger environments where we need to quote out 60, 100, 200 VMs, we can import that into an Excel spreadsheet and do it a lot quicker than Azure Calculator. So any help needed on licensing, please don't hesitate. Also related to this, these are tools that when we ask our clients about them, especially then those that have come to us and have already deployed Azure and need help, they don't always know about these tools. The one on the left, understand and forecast your costs. That's a product Microsoft calls Azure Cost Management and Building. It's a long word. If you remember a company called Cloudian or Cloud9, however you want to pronounce it, Microsoft bought them 2018-ish, I think, and they bought some other companies as well from a cost management perspective. So this is a really cool tool. If you haven't looked into it, and the link will be here at the end of the slide deck, run it. I have a screenshot from it on this next slide, but we run it for all of our clients, and it gives some good cost management analysis and recommendations on how to optimize costs. It also has, oh, did you have a question?
No, I was just gonna say it's a very underrated tool that is extremely beneficial.
For example, if you've got some public IP addresses, because you have to pay for public IP addresses. They're cheap, they're like $5 a month. But if you've got some public IP addresses and there's no bandwidth on them and they're not being used, cost management will literally tell you, hey, you're paying for something that you aren't using. If you've got some VMs that are undersized or oversized, that means they're being taxed or they're being undertaxed, cost management will say, hey, make this VM bigger, it's being overutilized, and make this VM smaller, it's being underutilized. Austin and Lindsay and I can help you with this tool, but it's really pretty cool. Next in the middle here is cost optimize your workloads. Azure Advisor, similar cost management billing, but more focused on Azure best practices. So Azure Advisor has stuff on security, compliance, optimization, performance, and another, like Austin mentioned, underutilized tool, really cool as well. And there's a lot of overlap between Advisor and cost management billing. Oh, and one more thing in cost management billing, you can set budgets. So if you're large, for our larger clients that actually have department budgets and they allocate a certain number of dollars per month to each department, you can actually set that up in cost management billing. And then whenever they go over budget, something happens, right? A warning, services stall. I mean, you can set all that stuff up. Back to the middle, Azure Advisor, very cool tool. We can help walk you through that. Down below that, we've already hit on the hybrid benefit in Azure reservations. And then on the right here, control your costs. This is actually more important than it seems. We use Microsoft's Cloud Adoption Framework, and we use Azure Policy. Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework is Microsoft's best practices for deploying Azure, and our engineers are all trained on this. We use this for building out environments, especially when it comes to security and compliance. Building these things out the right way can help you really rapidly get your environment within a secure manner and following your compliance rules. And then also, if you've got to make any changes or you're planning on, expansive growth, the Cloud Adoption Framework helps build out of that environment so that when you've got growth coming up, you can help talk with us, and we'll help build things out that can handle your projected growth. And then next here, I'm going to show you this slide here, Azure Cost Management plus Billing. So here's an example. This is from a Microsoft website, so I just copy and pasted it. This actually isn't anybody's data. But you can see here for the month of June, where we are is June 10th, and they're at about $847 for the month. They're forecasted $2,400 for the month, and then their budget was it's $1,000. So now they're going to be over this. There's an overage forecast. So really cool thing from cost management from billing, and it really does help you. And we use this a lot. Help look at what's going on. Cost management from billing will also break down where the costs are occurring from, so you can have reports on: is this from virtual machines? Is it from storage? If you've done what it's called Azure tagging your resources and putting them in certain groups, it will report on that as well. So really a super duper cost management tool. I'm going to launch one more poll question, and it's focused on this: is prior to this webinar, were you familiar with these cost management solutions? Because we see that many people aren't. So just kind of curious what the audience says here.
Yeah, one thing to add while we're waiting, Wade, is one really cool thing about Azure Advisor is it also pulls recommendations from Microsoft Defender. So we know security is a big thing nowadays. So it's going to give you recommendations on different security solutions to implement to better protect and increase your security posture overall. So just another cool feature there.
Absolutely. Well, not surprising, the no's are winning by 70% to 30%. I'll leave this poll open for a few more seconds, but this is what we see. It doesn't seem like the Microsoft marketing engine talks about these tools too much. The marketing engine does talk a lot about migrations and Azure Virtual Desktop and Windows 365. You may have seen some more information recently on something called Sentinel, Azure Sentinel, which is a SIEM, a security incident events management, competes with things like Splunk and Logarithm and things like that. And that we're seeing a big uptick on that as well, because then you can send all of your logs from servers, Office 365, your Cisco Meraki devices, your firewalls, your third-party tools, and put them in one place and do some reporting, which can help for security, compliance management, so on and so forth. All right, I'm going to close the poll. Again, no's won 70 to 30%. So we like. I'm glad. Thank you for answering that, because we really get the feeling that these tools aren't as well advertised as they could be. So we make these part of our conversations here with everyone. All right, just a few minutes left here. Jumping into our next steps. Have any questions for us? Please send us an email. We also have Maya and Jonas. I keep saying Jonas. Jonas is on our team as well. Maya and Austin and Lindsay's contact information on the last slide here. Here's a snippet of our assessment that I mentioned earlier. This is so where we can come in and assess your environment and then help plan on moving that environment into Azure. As I mentioned, all the links, so everything that we've hit on here, these are the links. So that I did my best to capture almost every single one here. And then you can, when you get the PDF from Chuck, then you can click on these. And again, if you haven't seen Advisor or Cloud Adoption Framework, click on them. I'm sorry, if you haven't seen Cost Management and Azure Advisor, click on them. They're actively running in your Azure environment as we speak, if you've got an Azure environment, and they already have recommendations available to you. And if you haven't seen them, didn't know about them, you'll look at them and going, oh my God, this is really, really cool. So take a look at those. We highly recommend those. And if you need any assistance with anything related to that, just let us know. Last slide here. LinkedIn contact information for myself, Lindsay and Austin. We mentioned the Azure assessment. And there's a few more things about us. I hit on the data center optimization. This is an invitation-only program with Microsoft. We're in our 4th year of it, I think. And this gets us in touch with the Azure experts and people who literally wrote the code. So if you need help on something, Austin and Lindsay and I can contact Microsoft and say, hey, Microsoft, you just released this new feature in Azure Sentinel for collecting log information. One of our clients has this question, help us out. And so we get to literally talk to the Microsoft engineers that wrote the code for these products. We have Microsoft's highest level of support. Microsoft brands it Premier Support. So if there's something our support team can't answer because there's something broken, we go to Premier Support. Another really cool thing about Premier Support is they have these tools they brand Insights. They can run these tools against your environment, your applications, your web servers, and if there's any odd things going on between them, they have an answer for you that you can run Insights yourself in Azure, but you won't. Insights only is maybe 50% capacity or whatever. The Premier Support team has Insights, and it creates oodles and oodles of logs. But that's how that one client I mentioned that needed to do encryption change. We used the Premier Support team to troubleshoot it, and they came back with that. Also, when we have clients that have data or stuff in US West Coast, US East Coast, and they're concerned about some replication across the continent, Premier Support has tools to test that above and beyond any tools that we have access to. We're part of Microsoft's Partner Advisory Council, small and medium business, as well as a few others. So this is where we get to know what's going on with Microsoft before they publish it. We're under NDA for a lot of things, but it helps us know and give input as to future Microsoft products. We do a lot of co-partnering with other partners, partner to partners things. So we know our wheelhouse, we're staying in our wheelhouse. If you've got a big data warehouse project coming up with a whole bunch of things, ETL, extract, transform, load, we partner with another company for that. So please don't hesitate if you have any questions for something that we don't know or we haven't presented here, we can get you in contact with another Microsoft partner that does. And we're also a member of Microsoft's International Association of Microsoft Channel Partners, which I always say is the worst acronym ever. And this is a collection of Microsoft partners worldwide. And we're on the board, and which gets us also access to some things that Microsoft only releases to IAMCP, and then helps us find other Microsoft partners that do things that we don't do. So that's the end of this slide deck here. I've got one question that came in here. How long does it take to migrate virtual machines to Azure? Good question. Believe it or not, it doesn't take too long. Bandwidth, no surprise, is one of the main drivers of how long it'll take. There's a cool tool from Microsoft called Azure Site Recovery that will replicate your VM to Azure, and that VM cost, not the storage, but the VM compute is free for 31 days. So we use that tool to migrate VMs to Azure and to set up disaster recovery as a service, where you can have ASR, Azure Site Recovery, running constantly and replicating VMs to other regions from a disaster recovery standpoint. So it doesn't take too long to copy it over. It's more of a matter of bandwidth and just getting the Azure environment set up. So most VMs copy within a few hours, if not sooner. Any other questions? Austin, Lindsay, I see one, but I can't scroll up and down on it.
Yeah, I'm trying to get it. I think, and Lindsay, I don't know, can you read the full question there?
Cool. Yeah, it says, what's your best advice to do on-prem physical into Azure? Will site recovery do that for physical also? And that's by David.
Yeah. Yeah, great question. So P2V, physical to virtual. If it's a physical server that's not a virtual machine, Azure Site Recovery will also do that as well. So we can do P2V into Azure, and then obviously VM to VM, but you could do physical to Azure as well. So P2V using, again, we mostly use Site Recovery. Our engineers also have other tools at their disposal, so it depends what's on that physical server, and if you're replicating to anything else or in databases or things like that. But yes, we can take a physical server and replicate it to Azure. In addition, we can back up that physical server, and it doesn't have to be a VM, it can just be a physical server. You can back that up to Azure as well. And that's usually where most people start, is they back up or just do disaster recovery, copying a VM to Azure or a physical box to Azure. And that's something our engineering team does routinely.
Perfect. And Dave Monroe just piggybacked off that and noted that the presentation is focused on VMs, but Azure still has physical migrations as well.
Yeah, very true. Thanks, Dave, for that. Our clients that still have a heavy on-premise presence, especially our tribal customers, tend to have a very strong on-premise presence. Most of their machines are VMs, but not all, right? And a lot of times those physical ones just stay there. But we do recommend considering Azure Site Recovery just as a way to replicate it to a Azure region. Even if you only replicate it once a month, at least you've got some backup of it in Azure. Anything else? I'm not seeing any other questions.
Oh, it looks, Dave was just noting again, he popped in there and just noted he forgot to put the question mark on there. So it looks like David and Dave both had the same question. So thanks for addressing those, Wade.
Yeah, it's a common question. We get that a lot. And I used to run IT departments for years. I used to be a server hugger. I love those things, but we're in a different world now. So moving things to Azure and standing up a VM in Azure, even if you just replicate a domain controller to Azure and you just have a one domain controller running in Azure and we can run them for less than $50 a month. That might be just a good place to start.
And what about backup to Azure?
Microsoft has a tool called Microsoft Azure Backup Service, and then just you can actually run a server on your environment and install Azure Backup Server, very similar to Data Protection Manager for Microsoft. The only thing you can't do on that is not back up to Azure. You can back up to the disk, or you can back up to Azure. And then archiving can mean different things to different people. So I'll just answer archive what it means to me right now, but you can definitely back up to Azure. You can archive that data in a few different ways. One of the common things we see is taking a whole VM or like a whole database and then putting it into a archive tier of storage, which is a cheaper storage tier. You can get really what's called cool or cold storage, which is a lot less expensive. The caveat to that is that you will have to quote unquote rehydrate that data if you need it back. It can take a day or two to sometimes rehydrate data, but it's a cheaper solution to archiving. And then the Microsoft Azure Backup Server has all the same settings you've seen in Windows Backup, Data Protection Manager. So you can think the most you can back up to Azure is 3 times a day. And then, but you can back up to it and then archive it. And Azure also has a data lifecycle policy. So you can set policies on your data, be it backed up data, be it other data, so that if it's not touched for X number of days, like if it hasn't been touched in 30 days, move it from hot to cool. If it hasn't been moved and touched then after 6 months and cool, move it to archive. So lots of ways to manage and archive backed up data or just regular data in Azure. Next question, we have 50 terabytes in a NAS that is not backed up. Yeah, that's a good example of taking that and putting that into either copying it or backing it up and then putting it into a cool or archive tier just for an insurance policy, so to speak, just to make you sleep better at night, right? That it's like, hey, I've got this as been backed up, but it goes into Azure and we back it up once a month or once every 6 months or whatever. And you can pay for the cheapest tier, the archive tier. And then rehydration is just the caveat to understand. We see this a lot with line of business applications. So if you've got an old ERP system and it's got your books from 2014, let's say, for regulatory reasons, you have to keep it. Sometimes it's just easier to take that database, put it into cool or archive tier. You probably never need it, but your auditor requires you to have it, or your industry compliance requires you to have it. Putting it there in a cool or archive tier is a very affordable way to take a scenario like that and put it in Azure. I think that's it for questions. Or Lindsay, Austin, did you see anything else that I missed?
I don't believe so.
Perfect. Well, thanks again, everybody, for attending our webinar. Please don't hesitate to contact us with any questions. And as I mentioned earlier, Chuck will be in contact soon with the PDF version of these slides, as well as this will be on our website as a recorded webinar that you can reference in the future. So on behalf of Lindsay and Austin and Chuck, thanks again for joining our webinar. Stay safe out there, and please contact us if you have any questions. Yes, we will be providing the presentation, yep. So Chuck will get that out to you in the PDF format.
Thanks, everyone.
Yep, thanks everyone, have a great day, bye.